Students, you are most welcome to EPG Pathshala. Today we are concerned with economic history of early India. India from earliest times to 1707. The module that we are concerned today is particularly economic conditions during the Mauryan period, that is in early India. It is chronologically ranged from circa 4th century BCE to 2nd century BCE. During this period, early India, what type of economic conditions witnessed, these to be discussed today. So, first of all, let us see the main objectives that are to be dealt with in this module. Number 1, agriculture. Number 2, trade and commerce. Number 3, economic policy. Number 4, industries. Now, the main sources from which we can collect information in regard to these economic activities during the Mauryan period are overall three categories. Number 1, indigenous sources. Number 2, non-indigenous sources. Number 3, archaeological sources. First of all, we see indigenous literary sources. Mostly the Arthashastra of Kautilya and the Jatakos. There are many other sources, but those are dealing with other aspects of Mauryans. So, in this, so far as economic conditions are concerned, we are mainly concerned with these two types of sources, Arthashastra of Kautilya and the Jatakos, that is indigenous literary sources. Archaeological sources, in this category we find two major sources, inscriptions of Ashoka and the coins, and then we go to non-indigenous literary sources, again literary sources. Accounts of Diodorus Siculus, Strabos Geographicon, Arrian's Indica, Megasthenes Indica. So, these are the sources from which we shall be collecting information for our understanding the economic conditions of the Mauryan period. First of all, agricultural policy or agrarian policy. Use of the alluvial soil of the Ganga valley. Students, you understand agricultural operations can be carried out in this type of soil, alluvial soil. It is better to carry out in this type of soil agricultural operations. Number 2, bringing wasteland under cultivation. The land lying waste, unused, those lands to be brought under cultivation so that agricultural prosperity can be ensured. Number 3, developing irrigation. It is usually required because without irrigation, agricultural operations cannot be possible. So, irrigation is necessary. Next, agricultural activities to be conducted by the high-ranking officer of the Mauryan government, that is the Shitadhyaksha. He supervised agriculture. And particularly, he was to perform certain duties. Those were concerned with collecting the seeds of fruits, creepers, cereals and cash crop like cotton, supplying the cattle and the plough. To employ the agricultural laborer and for facilitating the tasks of cultivation. Students, you must know that agricultural operations cannot be possible without employing human resources. So, agricultural laborer is necessary in order to carry out agricultural operations. So, these are the things that the Shitadhyaksha was to perform in order to ensure agricultural development. Next, we find particularly irrigation, because as I have told you, irrigation, without irrigation, it is not possible for one to carry out agriculture. So, agricultural development was due to irrigation. The Udaka Bandhu, that is sluice, controlled for supplying regularly the required amount of the water to the field. A water reservoir called Sudarshan Lake, as you know all, the Sudarshan Lake was built up in Gujarat area, and in this construction local rural Pushyagupta was also involved, and another reservoir, water reservoir, it is situated in Besnagar, and it has come to light through archaeological excavations at that place. It is called irrigation channel, 185 feet by 7 feet by 5 feet. It is a huge and large irrigation channel. The task of irrigation was entrusted to the agronomy high ranking officers. Next, we get agrarian settlements. Students, in this connection, you should remember that it is a very planned policy of the Mauryan government, Janapada Nivesha, as we find it mentioned in the Kautilya Arthashastra. It is very important program, and deliberately this program was pursued in order to populate the areas for further improvement or development or progress of the kingdom. So, Janapada Nivesha is a very important program. So, we have to discuss this. Agrarian settlements, particularly Janapada, considered as the third element, Tritiya Prakriti. What is it? This is also an important part of the discussion, today's discussion. First of all, in the Arthashastra, we get 7 elements of this, 7 constituent elements of this state: Janapad, Shami, Amatya, Janapad, Durga, etc., etc. So, Janapad is a part and parcel of the state. Literally, it means the feet of the people, that is, the land settled with people. This is called essentially or literally Janapada. Now, the Janapada as resources, Janapada Sampad, it is also mentioned in the Kautilya Arthashastra. Why resources? Because Janapada to be settled with particularly Shudra population, because they will have to be employed in carrying out agricultural operations. First of all, the people of the Janapada provided with not only Shudra populations, there may be people from outside area also, and as well as those areas within the kingdom. So, they must be provided with some benefits. Number 1, the exemption. Number 2, or decrease of revenue, so that the people could be attracted to settle in a newly created Janapada. Because just now I have told you that a new land was brought under cultivation, and first of all, this was a very large program, official program, the first part of which was to attract people to settle in the newly created land. Number 3, the distribution of agricultural implements like seeds, cattle, etc. These are to be performed by the Shitadhaksha, but these, particularly providing seeds, plough, etc., these may be called agricultural loan of what we avail today. Now, if we see that this is how agricultural development was ensured. So, what we get? Naturally, the government claimed revenue in return for what it supplied to the people concerned with agricultural operations. Number 1, land revenue determined on the basis of 1, land type, whether fertile land or not. Second, production from the land, that is, what type of production, what produces were from the land. Those were also considered when land revenues were determined. Number 3, crop type. What type of crop, millet or other, barley or wheat or rice, paddy, brihi, what type of crop was produced? Cotton crop, that is cash crop, what type of crop? Taking into consideration all these factors, land revenue was determined, and in this connection what we get? 1/4 part of the land produce charged as the king's tax from the peasant. Very clear? Peasant, what they produced, 1/4 part of the produce was to be given to the king, and sometimes it might have been 1/6 part of the production that was to be given to the king. Number 2, base of the land tax, whether land tax charged on the cultivator individually, not taking into consideration the whole of village or whole of land, but individual peasant was charged for paying land revenue to the king. Number 2, quality of the soil, that is, how much fertile that land was, whether mediocre or low quality or high quality. So, accordingly, land revenue was determined. Land tax and production of the soil, what type of production, huge production or medium production or low production, how much production, how much yield of the land, that was also taken into consideration for determining land tax. So, students, you understand that how meticulously land tax was charged and how affectionately, not at the cost of the peasant, their conditions were also taken into consideration for before determining the amount of land tax to be given to the king. Next, what we get? Characteristics of the Mauryan agricultural system. So, we can now in a nutshell get an idea about salient features of the Mauryan agrarian system. What we get? The cultivator paid land revenue to the state. Land surveyed by the state officer Rajuko. Why surveyed? For determining the royal share, how much amount of land tax could be collected from the peasants for the king. Therefore, land to be surveyed. What amount of land lying? Knowing cultivable land, how much land was cultivable. This was also taken into consideration so that land tax could be determined. So, these two constitute the major features of the Mauryan agricultural system. Next, what we get? We get industries. Industries were under the Akarodhaksha. In case of agriculture, we have seen Shitadhaksha. In case of industrial production, that is also a kind of production, non-agricultural production. Here we find the top officer called Akarodhaksha. The private enterprise was also welcomed besides the state control. The Shutradhaksha looked after weaving. Shutradhaksha only weaving supervised. Another Adhaksha we get, that is Shuradhaksha. He was concerned with the production of liquor, and artisans were patronized and their crafts also, and occupations localized. from the Jatakos, in this context I must mention, from the Jatakos, what we get? We get certain occupational groups being localized. Sahasra Koti Gammo. Sahasra Koti, actually, Kommaro Gamo. The Gamo, that is Grama, that is village, was inhabited only by the Kormokaros, Kommaro. So, this is how we get different occupations being localized during this period. In other words, they were specializing in their crafts, and they tried to stay assembled. This is how they were localized, and they also got support from the king. Number 3, industries. In connection with industries, we find artisans given wages for their products according to quality and quantity. What they produced, where they, in return of that production, they used to get wages. But wages depended on two major things, quality and quantity. How much productions they could provide and what type of quality, low quality, medium or high quality. Accordingly, their wages were determined. Today also this is followed in many cases, quality and quantity. Students, you remember two things in connection with production. Quality and quantity, unless and until it is ensured, no development, economic development is possible. This is as clear as this from the Arthashastra of Kautilya. This is also to be followed up in present day also. Causes of the development of trade and commerce. Why trade and commerce developed during the Mauryan period? First of all, wide establishment of the Mauryan political control in early India, that is almost the whole of India was taken under control of the Mauryas. B. Artisans supported, as I have told you. Agrarian income, I have also told you. Communication facilities, that is road communication was there, and occupational organization, as I have told you just now. All these factors made it possible for the development of trade and commerce during the Mauryan period in early India. Next, we find trade policy. So, taking into consideration these factors, trade policy was determined for the state, not only for the state but also for the trader. Let us see what is there. First of all, trade policy determined according to number 1, demand, number 2, supply, number 3, price rise, number 4, price fall, number 5, transport, number 6, production cost. Students, you see what modern was their approach, their determining policy towards the development of industry, particularly trade. So, how far demand was there, how much supply was there in the market, whether the commodities prices fell or went up, whether transport facilities were there, whether production cost, how much production cost was. All these factors were taken into consideration so that trade policy successfully could be determined. The astronomy looked after. Again, they constituted very high ranking officers. The astronomy looked after the affairs of trade and commerce, 1/10 part as tax from the commodities sold. Whatever commodities were sold in the market, 1/10 part was charged as king's tax for the state. This tax might have been equivalent to that of sales tax from a trader, as we give today also. Sales tax on every commodity, sales tax is charged as government share. In the past also, particularly during the Mauryan period also, this type of sales tax was there. What we get next? In connection with trade and commerce, as I told you, transport was also taken into consideration for determining trade policy. So, in connection with communication, agronomy officers looked after the affairs of route communication. In this connection, particularly from Laghman, that is in Afghanistan, one area from where we have got two epigraphic records in which we find the mention of the Karopothi. Karopothi is nothing but the royal road. The road, and during the Mauryan period, we find mention of more than one routes from different places, from one place to another, from east to west, from south to north. And one of these routes was royal road. Still it is in northern India, Uttara Patha, this Karopothi royal road. This is also mentioned in Aramaic edicts. Karopothi, Professor P.N. Mukherjee of the University of Calcutta, he deciphered this inscription and brought out this meaning that this was nothing but the royal road used in this time. So, what we get next? Pannodhaksha, another high-ranking officer of the Mauryan government. He was to look after trade and commerce. Very clear from the name of the officer, Pannodhaksha. He was also dealing with pannos, that is commodities, determining the trade policy for the state as well as for the trader also. As I told you, both the state's share as well as the trader's share were looked after by the government. In this connection, another type of information in connection with trade and commerce we get from the Jatakas. Very significant. Number one, use of crows by the merchant in plying sheep in the sea. And we get the crows used to fly to the land. So, crows' habit is to go to the land according to their direction, their flying direction. The merchant in the ship in the sea determined the direction. That is, overseas trade was there. Navigator, merchants, they used to ship in the sea in carrying out their business or trade. In connection with trade and commerce, we get certain more information, that is ports. As I told you on another occasion, port is a gateway to overseas trade. Here also we get major three ports. Tamralipti on the east, that is east coast. Second, Varugaza, it is modern Broch on the west coast. Third, Surparako, present day Sopara, again on the west coast. These ports were used during this time through which merchandise was shipped. Next, we get imports. What commodities were imported from the west? Horse, glass, linen, red coral. What exports? Next, we get exports to the west. Ivory goods, peacocks, parrots, carnelian, pearls, cinnamon, agate, cotton, diamond, paper. As a result, we get certain amount of trade profit also for the state. So, in a nutshell, what we get about the economic conditions during the Mauryan period. First of all, the Mauryan state introduced a state controlled economy under which also allowed the entry of private enterprises to some extent. The state brought about development in the economy of the period under discussion. The Mauryas successfully collected taxes or revenues by way of setting up an efficient administrative system in early India. This is how they ensured economic development for the state, with some entry, some allowing some to some extent the private enterprises also. This is what we actually get information regarding the Mauryans' economic conditions in early India. Thank you.